Hey, what's going on, champs? I'm Aaron Deliosa. Welcome to an Immigrant's Life podcast, my podcast about immigrants and immigration and everything in between. Thank you for listening and downloading the show, and thank you for supporting my dad.
New week, new episode. But before that, as always, I'd like to thank you for joining us. I appreciate you spending time with us, whatever you might be doing, commuting to work, actually working, cleaning the house, even listening to fall asleep. Please know that we appreciate you, and it's such a privilege for you to allow us to be part of your life. However, if you want more AIL content, you can follow us at An Immigrant's Life on all the social media. Also, according to our data, most of you listen through Spotify and Apple Podcasts. So if you're one of those people, I'd appreciate it if you could give us a 5-star rating. It's very easy. For Spotify, it's on the main page of the podcast underneath the description. For Apple, you just have to scroll down the main page and you'll see it there. Just click the 5-star. I really appreciate your support as it allows the podcast to reach more audiences. That's the biz. Now let's talk about this episode. It's an absolute honor to have this distinguished guest on the podcast. We talk about his life, Filipino culture, and even NFTs, which I don't know nothing about. So this is a very interesting episode, and I'm sure you'll enjoy it. So, without further ado, let's get into the show. Isa, dalawa, tatlo. Today's guest is an artist, an entrepreneur, and a futurist. The preeminent authority and propagator of teaching Baybayin. Everyone, please welcome Kristian Kabuay.
Hello, everybody. Thank you for having me. And I'm still getting used to doing podcasts now. I've started my own on and off, but I think this is the way things are now. You know, post. I guess we're still in COVID, but this new future. So thank you for having me.
Oh, you're welcome, and thank you for coming on. I really do appreciate it. And if you have anything to promote, please go ahead, my man.
Yeah, just you could if you Google me, you'll find all my socials, Kristian Kabuay, and probably the latest thing that I'm working on is my artwork. So if you find me on social media, you'll see what I'm doing around art, just not just visual art, but also music and multimedia.
Yeah, man, you're like all over the place. I love it.
Yeah, I think that's where I brought that that immigrant mentality. Even though like many of us, we've been here for a long time, but we just don't let go, right? Maybe it's from my Lola of chasing that American dream, but then we find out that for some of us it's a nightmare, or the what's that the milk is sour, and then the honey isn't so sweet. So we have to somehow keep figuring things out.
I don't know, but I have spoken to a lot of American immigrants, and most of you guys are just like very, I don't know, like not negative, but pessimistic about it, I guess.
Yeah. I think it's probably because the demographic that you're talking about, because usually the people that are positive won't say they're immigrants. They'll say, "Oh, I'm American," even if they just came here last week, and they still smell. They have the smell of Manila, the Baybayin box, and I think that maybe for the ones that are, I don't know, this might sound condescending or whatever, but the ones that are more aware of America, right? America's past and even present. We're still trying to figure that out, right? And sometimes it doesn't happen until you're in your 30s, and you have that pessimism because you've seen this story played out in the Philippines or in your own country, and then now you're seeing it in America. Like, oh, okay, this is how colonialism works from the office place, right? Oh, okay, I can see. Okay, that guy is like Magellan, you know, and then you say, okay, this guy is like Humabon, you know, the one that's kissing ass to Magellan and things like that. So um, it takes a lot of, I guess, introspection, if that's the right word, and being real and honest. So I think that might be, you know, that might be why. But I agree, and I try to be, I guess, more positive. I am, but sometimes the negative stuff or what people think is negative, it's fun to talk about, and it's funny too.
Yeah, of course. I mean, you need to balance, right? Like the yin and the yang. You need some negativity and you need some positivity as well. Like, some people are like, oh, only positive vibes. You cannot have positive vibes all the time. Like, it doesn't make sense.
Yeah, it's fake.
You know what I mean? I want to get into more opinions about life and everything, but let's talk about your hero's journey. I read you were born in the Philippines, but which part of the Philippines were you born?
Yeah, I was born in Mandaluyong. For those that don't know, Mandaluyong is within Metro Manila. I would say if you know where Mega Mall is, that's where I was born. The hospital is not there anymore.
The one in the
Right
back?
there, yes. I know. I recognize those two towers. So
Okay,
for those,
okay.
sorry, we're talking on video here, but there are two towers with lights, and those are two abandoned buildings. I remember that were built in the 90s, and I don't know if it's still abandoned or not. But last time I was home in 2018, I think. I think I don't know, it was half full or something like that. But yes, Mandaluyong. But I grew up in the Pasig area, and Pasig is just another city within Metro Manila.
When did you move to America?
Well, I moved to America back and forth many times. So the usual during when I was a kid, like maybe a baby, and then when I was maybe about 2-3 years old, then I went back to the Philippines and I went to preschool and kindergarten there, and then went back to the U.S. for I guess my adolescence, and then after high school I went back to the Philippines to find myself and all of that. But I ended up staying for 10 years,
Okay.
and then I'm back here, and then I'm planning then to go. Ultimately the goal would be to go back and forth. That's the goal.
Isn't that like everyone's goal?
Yes, it is. That's the American dream. The American dream is to leave America whenever you want.
Yeah, exactly. Collect all the money, go back home, spend it there, go back again to get more.
Yeah, and that's what racists will really get mad at. I remember someone was saying, "Go back to your country." I said, I am going to, but first I'm going to take all your money. They don't like
Makes
that.
sense. Yeah, of course. They're like, oh, you're taking our all resources and you bring it back to your country.
Yeah, and that's what I've been working with a lot of. I meet a lot of actually Filipino Americans that have done that. They're just saying that Team Manila is one of the great T-shirt companies and graphic design companies in the Philippines. And I remember they put out a shirt. Remember when it's back in the day, maybe the 80s, 90s, maybe even to this day, where if it's just made in the Philippines, like I remember going to Old Navy or, and then like my tita will look at this shirt. Oh, it's made in the Philippines. I won't buy that. Right.
Yep.
Because it's like they're going to send it back to the Philippines. So it becomes this odd circle of life of clothing and Americanism. But they put out a saying that instead of made in the Philippines, they said make it in the Philippines. So you can take it many different ways, but I've met many Philams that have actually left their nice, cozy, 6-figure jobs in the US to go to the Philippines to start something. And that's something that I've always wanted to do as an adult now with more skills and privilege. So that's one of the plans.
Yeah, that's everybody's plan. Of course, me too, obviously, right?
Yep.
Like everyone wants to retire there, Whenever that date or age you want to retire, you do that. I mean,
Yeah.
you know that saying that it's more fun in the Philippines. It is. It's actually more fun.
Yeah, it is if you have resources.
Exactly. If you have the
Yeah.
money, like if
Yeah.
you have the money, it is fun. But then again, you know, you'll see. I'm sure you see Facebook posts of your relatives, and you're like, I don't know about you, but my family, we didn't come from money, right? And they'll
Mhm.
post like they have one San Miguel beer, like one six pack, and they're so happy.
Yeah. And I think that's, that's one thing I remember. I always put things into perspective. Like, you see the kids playing in the street, even when they have no chanelas and, but they're so happy. And, then here you're complaining, oh, my TV is too small. It's only 45 inches and, things like that. But I think that has to be kind of dissected in a way. I mean, because maybe you don't know what you don't know, I think.
Mm,
But I guess happiness is different, right? For
mm,
for everybody. Like, because there is literally day by day,
mm.
so here we have the privilege to think about our future or 401ks and things like that. But back home, the majority of people are just happy just to, get that, whether it's food or small salary just for that day.
Yeah, I know. Like you see like people working till they're old and then they have their kids and then now it's the kids' turn to take care of them. And me, I'm
Yeah.
like sometimes I think about it like, what if your kids doesn't take care of you?
Yeah. Yeah, that's what they say, in America. Oh, they'll put you in an old home and things like that. And yeah, I've seen it. And as we get older and we see our family getting older, it does put us in that dilemma where, culturally, yeah, you should, it's just the right thing to do. Don't, but then how do we make it work? I think that's, in America, because especially if you're married to a non-Filipino or a more Americanized, they'll say, oh, you're already 45 years old, why are you going to take care of your parents, so
Yeah,
you see that conflict.
yeah, exactly, exactly. So growing up in America, did you feel American?
Yeah, I did. I mean, because I was very, in the 80s. It was, yeah, like the golden age of America, or one of the more recent golden ages of America and capitalism. Ronald Reagan with Madonna and all that football, and so I grew up with that, all that stuff, hip hop, and I did feel American until I remember one specific case. I was in elementary school, and one of the students asked me like, oh, what are you? And then I didn't experience that before, and I said, oh, I'm American. And he goes, no, you're not. And I said, okay, well, that confused me. I said, what? Wait, I speak English, I live in America, and all of
Mm-hmm.
that stuff. So then I went home and I asked my mom, and I asked her, said, oh, this kid at school said, I'm not American. And she goes, oh, you're not, you're Filipino. And because I think at that time I wasn't a citizen or something like that, but I didn't know.
Mm-hmm.
So I went back the next day to school, and then I told that kid that, oh, I'm Filipino. And then he said, what's that?
And
So
that's that.
that's my introduction of identity in elementary school. And I think a lot, I don't know what at the time what hurt more, was that not being American or someone saying, what's that? Right.
So now,
So
since you're older and you've thought about it, which one hurts more?
um now I think that if I would, I mean, kids now, they're so conscious of identity and things like that.
Hmm.
I think if that happened to me now, it probably would have been like more like, what's Filipino?
Hmm. Yeah.
And I would say like, oh, well, didn't you watch Trece, or didn't you watch Raya, or
Yeah.
I would try to make the connection with Jokoy or something like that,
Yeah.
and say like, are you stupid? You don't know what that is, because
Do you
now we
still
have
get that question
Google.
though?
Oh yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
Not like what is Filipino or whatever, but they'll always relate it to lumpia or
Yeah.
Manny Pacquiao or
Yeah. Like Manny
Jollibee.
Pacquiao or adobo, which is like it drives me nuts. Because like,
Yeah.
if you say adobo, which I appreciate that you kind of know something, but
Yeah.
dig deeper.
Yeah, and I get it. That's all they know. But then if you look at on the flip side, if I meet like an American and then they go, "Oh, where's your family from?" and they go, I don't know, Kansas City, and like, "Oh, Kansas City barbecue and Kansas City Chiefs and
Yeah.
cows and
Yeah.
do you live on a farm?" Of
Exactly.
course they're gonna probably get offended and things. But if you flip it on that side, then it just highlights some of the I guess quote unquote innocent ignorance in the questioning.
Exactly. So you mentioned that after high school, you went back to the motherland to find yourself. First of all, that's like Filipinos don't find themselves. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Did your parents like take it fully, or was it like, what are you talking about?
Yeah, they didn't at first like it. Because and I get it from their perspective. Like my Lola, of course, came over and during martial law and brought over the whole family through, the petition process, which, could take a decade or longer. And then now the eldest grandson wants to go back. So it's like, what are you doing? And plus, they have the sting, I call it the sting of martial law, where you have a generation that doesn't like their home country, because they had this trauma, and it's like, it's dirty there. Why do you want to go there? There's poor people, and then it becomes this classist attitude because we're now Americans, why we only go back there if we go to Boracay or vacation, So I kind of had that kind of sentiment. But for a while though, my parents actually, they moved back with me. Yeah. And that was surprising. And you don't hear that stories, people that are, much older or from a certain generation, they usually, if they came during the martial law era, they rarely go back until they retire and, in their 65 or 70. But, in their prime, they took that chance. Eventually they did move back sooner than I stayed. Because it was, it's difficult. I mean, I'm not going to say it's easy. It is difficult to make that transition. It's not like, you could easily get a job, right? It all depends on, what your expertise are, or in your head, they're like, wait, I'm only going to get paid how much in pesos? I can make that much in the US. I'm a manager and, I'm making more than the CEO and whatever. So that was kind of how it was.
Do you speak Tagalog?
I do. I learned through Eraserheads in River Maya.
The greatest.
Yes. So, I memorize like Overdrive and Ang Huling El Bimbo and all of that, and learn through the taxi drivers and the jeepney drivers and the tricycle drivers, all of that.
Oh, that's amazing, man. That's pretty cool. So you went back and you said you stayed for 10 years, you said?
Yeah, about 10 years.
What made you stay?
I was able to do a lot of different things that I wouldn't be able to do here. And I was young, and I don't if anybody has ever experienced the Manila nightlife and being a balikbayan. I mean, that could be. I'm planning to write a book about those years, because so there's. I'm sure, and maybe in other other groups where, at least when I grew up, there was always a thing where, like, you're in the US, and if you're bad, like say you join a gang, or you get in trouble, or you get bad grades, they're gonna say, oh, you're being bad, I'll send you to the Philippines. You live with your cousins or your grandparents or whatever. And that was always in my head, because I heard that from my friends and whatever. But I'll tell everybody here, I don't know if parents still do that, but I'll tell you that it's a lie, that it's not bad. You're going to be still treated well, in general. You'll probably, maybe you'll even get an allowance. And, if you're young, because the exchange rate is ridiculous. So, you could do a lot there with 5,000 pesos compared, at least when I was there. Now it's expensive, but I met a lot of people that were sent back to the Philippines because they were bad. They're from like LA, Australia, London, New York, Chicago. But then when they go to the Philippines, they end up being worse.
Yeah, I know. Because back in the Philippines, when I was growing up in high school, they send like, kids from America to study in the Philippines. I'll be like, why are you here? Like, oh, because we're bad in the US. Like, you're worse here. You're doing drugs and everything.
Yeah, exactly. Because now you have money, and then they're like, oh, balikbayan. Then they'll get all the girls, and then they'll be. I call it balikyabang. So, yabang means to be conceited for those that don't understand. But all of a sudden there's this prestige where, and also because at least then where you're American and there's this, you get that prestige of being an American, and some fully took advantage of that. But
get them girls, man.
I don't know if I'm sure I did a little, but it was fun. It was I stayed there because a lot of new opportunities, and I was able to have a group of friends and experience the life there. And I worked a bunch of odd jobs. I did go to school there. I finished college there. And it's just something that I wouldn't be able to experience here.
Yeah, for sure. So you went to college there. What did you take and where?
Yeah, so because I was just an average student. I barely, passed high school here. And my dad, he went to Ateneo. So I was like, oh, shoot. So for those that don't know, Ateneo is like a Harvard, Stanford.
I will say, yeah.
It's one of the prestigious schools in the Philippines.
Yeah.
And so my dad graduated there, and I thought, all right, let me try and go there. But then I only, went to public school in the US. So, I took a test to one of the rival schools, La Salle. La Salle is, La Salle, Ateneo, they're kind of like a Berkeley, Stanford, kind of thing. But then when I took that test for La Salle, because I took it because I wanted a practice test, right? I took it and I said, holy shit, I don't know any of this trigonometry. And I said, this shit is hard. I was looking around. I said, man, I don't know that. And me and all the Philams are looking stupid. We're looking at each other. We're, oh my God, I know this is hard. I mean, they never taught this in our public American high school. So I failed that. And I went to UP, University of the Philippines, to major in, I think it was a commercial art at the time. But I took the talent test where we had to paint and things like that. But my art is a bit more abstract. So the professor said that commercial art, you have to be like a photocopier, to be able to draw things as accurate as the clients and things like that. So he suggested that I major in fine arts and focus on painting. And I thought, I don't want to go. Why am I going to go to college to be a painter? I don't know any famous artist that went to college that majored in that. So I said, forget it. I didn't do that. And I went to a computer school. Then found out that was a scam because they were teaching us like COBOL and all these outdated programming languages when the internet is there, and so it was all obsolete and a scam. Then, I took like what else? Hotel restaurant management. I took a lot of things.
My God, dude, you were doctorate for everything.
I was trying to take these things, but then when I went there, I said, oh, this is for people that want to work for the airlines. And I don't want to, I would be a horrible server for food. I would spill it on people. And they looked at it very superficial. They said, oh, you're tall. You could work for as a flight attendant. I said, I don't want to deal with people and all of that stuff. So I said, forget it. I dropped out of that. And until I found out about a business school in Makati. And there are a lot of, it was taught in an American style, whatever that means, but it was more of like, just business skills and things like that. So I did finish in business management, but a few years ago, because my transcript or diploma got lost in a flood at my relative's house.
That's normal.
So then, Yeah. So then I went to go to the Department of Education website or whatever. I try to say, all right, where can I get my copy? Because say I have to apply for a job in the US just for proof.
Hmm.
But then I found out, I Googled, I said, oh, the school closed down because it was didn't meet the standards.
Yeah, the owners took all the money and bounced.
Yeah, exactly. I think they relocated to another country or something. So, you hear about that.
That's funny. And then I love this story that you went to a bookstore and then you found something there that pretty much changed your life, I think.
Yeah. So we're talking about the Philippine scripts. And so the first time I saw it was in an encyclopedia here at my grandparents' house. And that was, before the internet. I was young. Went to the letter P, and then I found the Katipunan. Katipunan, are the freedom fighters that helped that rebelled against Spain, and they had a flag with what at the time I thought was a capital I. Then I was at a festival, and they had these flags, these old revolutionary flags, and I tried to show off and tell the guy that, oh, that's letter I for independence, and he said, no, it's not. That's the letter K, the Ka. That's our old writing system. And so I got interested in it because at the time I was doing graffiti and writing and doing arts, and I was listening to a lot of 90s hip hop, and at that time they were talking about like Malcolm X, Marcus Garvey, talking about the racism, systematic racism, things that are still happening today. They were rapping about that, and so I learned about that. But I took that and thought about, like, all right, what about us in the Philippines? Because we have this colonial past. So when I went to the Philippines, finally, after I moved there, I went to National Bookstore, which is the biggest chain. And I found a chart of the writing system, and I was able to finally have a complete, I guess, set of it. But there was little context or history around it. And that's where I started to dig in and do more research around it. And that just kind of opened the doors for more knowledge and building relationships, and even from a business and community building perspective.
And then I also read that a Canadian white dude taught you more about it.
Yes. So when people ask me, like, oh, how did you find out about Philippine scripts? Like, did you have to go to the mountains in Sagada and wrestle a carabao in the mud and drink the blood and eat a balot? And said, no, I learned from a white guy from Canada. And so, because sometimes we add like because we're so unfamiliar with our pre-colonial culture, we put this mystique towards it, right? And then also our relatives say, oh, that's for the Satanists, that's evil. The mountain people, will put this negative stigma to it. But I tell them that, no, I learned a lot of it from a white guy in Canada. And I remember I found a website, and I emailed him, and this guy, his name's Paul Morrow. And at first I thought that, oh, okay, he's Filipino, because Paul, I thought Moro, like Moro in the southern Philippines.
Yeah.
He just spelled it different. But then he would correspond to me in straight Tagalog and all of that stuff, and I would do my best to figure it out until I found out that he's a white guy living in Calgary, and he plays in a Filipino rock band, writes for a Philippine newspaper, and is just really into the culture and community up there. So I learned, a lot of the history and, some of the more practical or modern issues around it. And I just expanded from there. So, I mean, and when I tell people that, it's funny because it's ironic, but then it's also sad in a way too, because we don't know our own culture, we have to learn it from someone else. But this person was nice enough to kind of help guide me at that time. But I don't know if, like, right now, like, there's over the past, I don't know, year, there's issues, like there's this Instagram account, if you follow, like, the Aswang Project.
Yes.
And they talk about mythical creatures of the Philippines and things. And for some reason, I don't know, maybe me and, we knew he was, again, a white guy in Canada. It's not the same guy, but it's like, yeah, because he published a documentary on the subject. And if you do a little research, you'll know who he is. And he's not hiding. But then a lot of Filipinos got mad. Oh, he's trying to trick us. He's trying to sell our culture back to us. And it's like, well, we have the opportunity to do it, especially now with our tools. But if you're not going to do it, then why get mad at, these other folks that are doing it,
Yeah, I mean, I heard about him and I did check him out, and he admits it. Like he's not making money. It's just he just wants to educate people.
Yeah, he's never like like if you follow the work, he's been transparent about it. If you follow or buy books from him and things like that, but I think that we're so insecure with our culture that we're quick to attack anyone that goes into our culture, puts their toes in the Filipino swimming pool. But we all have the ability to do what this person is doing. So then rather than complain, then build your own thing and try to put them out of business or, make something better. But it's much easier just to complain.
Yeah, we have this weird mentality of like, we're so proud, we're so nationalistic, but we don't do nothing about it.
Yeah, the blind nationalism, becomes blind fanaticism where, I think that, and that's now where, I'm a lot more optimistic about, like, let's just say the entertainment industry. Like we're seeing Trece, the Bosco brothers, the cleaning lady, which is a great show on FX that has a lot of Filipino presence. Ruby Ibarra, all of these, Raya, all of these things that are making it in pop culture. And we're seeing a lot more Filipino American independent producers. And I think that, it's hard to do. And that's why all those people that are doing it, they're already in their 40s or 50s because it took a long time for them to do it. But this next generation, that are in their 20s and teens and they're creators, like Bretman Rock and those guys, they have a lot more opportunity to build based on, what the previous generation did.
Yeah, from the shoulders of the giants.
Yes.
So you started by buying. Some people will say, like, what's the need of learning Baybayin?
Yeah. So there's a common, that's a common question, and it's very valid too. And ultimately it comes down to value. And so when I talk about it, I always position it as Philippine scripts for a cultural identity, for economic empowerment, leading to preservation. So because if you don't value something, then you can't preserve it. So a lot of people, they don't value it. And a lot of it is folks from the Philippines, right? Because they'll say like, oh, what's this? This is useless. It's not practical. What am I going to do? How is this going to earn me money? It always comes down to practicality and money with everything, right? But I like to question as well, in the Philippines, we do a lot of things that are impractical. The traffic problem is impractical, right? That is the MRT, that is impractical. It's impractical to have, Manila as the center of the economics and things like that. So, we do a lot of things that are impractical, but I think that for scripts, you can look at like Hangul, for example. And the Philippines is obsessed with Koreans. So, and if you look at Hangul, like where I stay in Katipunan, which is in Quezon City, if you go along Katipunan or Malate or these other cities, you're going to see more Hangul than Roman alphabet. And so the value there is that, you could recognize that it is Korean. And people may not be able to read the Hangul, but they can tell the difference between Korean Hangul versus the Japanese script or the Chinese script or Thai script or Arabic. So you already identify this writing system with a culture. So with the work that myself and my colleagues have been doing in propagating the script is now when people see Filipinos see this Baybayin or Philippine scripts, they oh, okay, that's Filipino. Like 10 years ago, Filipinos would see that. They'll think, oh, is that Thai? Is it Arabic? You know, but now even non-Filipinos are starting to recognize our script. And so from a business perspective, like a cultural identifier, because we don't really have a brand. If you're talking about like marketing, like what is the brand, the visual brand of the Philippines? If you think of like the Thais, you know, you would think about, you know, the temples, right?
The dancers.
The dancers. If you go to you know, Japanese restaurant, you think minimalism and whatever. You know, every culture has their own unique. But ours, if you go to a Filipino restaurant, I mean, what is that identifier? You know, it's confusing. You have the Last Supper, you have the cat that goes like that, and then you have those spoon and fork, and it's like, where are we? It's so confusing. You know, the only thing close enough is maybe like the Philippine sun. Is that, or maybe Jollibee, you know, our cultural icons. Even our colors are red, white, and blue. So that's confusing. So the only thing that we have is our writing system. And it's not just specific for Filipinos, but every culture uses their own writing system as a unique cultural identifier. So that is a practical use for it.
That's beautiful. Well said. Is there like a history that shows where the Baybayin started? Also, I know it's based from the Indian writing, right? Why is it Indian writing instead of Chinese?
Yeah, so the historical pattern follows the migration of the Philippines. So, for example, the Visayas, you know, it means is actually an Indian word, Indic term. Vijay means greatness, like a victory. Short for Sri Vijaya. Sri Vijaya is a kingdom that traveled from the southern India, then to Sumatra, Indonesia, then to the central Philippines, is what we know as the Visayas. So if you follow the exploration and trade patterns, you know, that's when not just the writing, but also the food. You know, we have like kari, we have putu. Putu is also Indian. And then we also have like, you know, our religion, you know, Christian religion identity. And so all of those things are rooted in Indian influence, but we don't teach that in the Philippines. We say, oh, 1521, Magellan came, then now we're Catholic, you know, and then the Muslims came there. We don't really talk about them. They're in the South. You know, it's just very superficial, historical teachings. And then we internalize that. So we don't really talk about our neighbors that pretty much are our relatives in Indonesia from a linguistic and cultural perspective. So the writing system came through that. You know, you can even say that the Philippine martial arts, you know, came through that as well. So food, language, you know, writing. Martial arts.
I love that you said that we don't talk about the Muslim brothers, because even in the flag, they're not included.
Exactly.
Like the race.
Yes. Exactly. I mean, they were the first ones to rebel, and there were a lot of rebellions, you know, before the 8 provinces. So it's this very Manila Tagalog Christian centric identity.
Yeah, it's so sad. I read that you work on a group trying to pass a bill that require Filipino students in the Philippines to learn Baybayin. Any update on that?
Yes, actually, good timing. So a new version of the bill called the Traditional Philippine Scripts Act passed the House just last week. So, I mean, it's the second time it passed through the House, but it never. So, a little bit of background. In 2011, I was working with a nonprofit group in the Philippines called Baybayin Buhayin. And this group is led by a pastor, Pastor Jay Anage. He's a very charismatic speaker, and he's quite the opposite of me. He's very religious, and he's like the El Shaddai of Baybayin, but even though we had like our differences in the way we think and do things, but we had a common goal. So we became friends, and even though we're opposite, and we worked together. And so for 10 years we've been working with local governments, nonprofits, students, and artists, trying to refine this. And we listened to the other groups like the Mangyan Heritage Group, the Kulitan practitioners in Pampanga, because there are other ethno-linguistic groups that don't want it to be named, say, Baybayin, because of the perception that it is a Tagalog Manila-centric movement. So it took a long time to kind of refine that, and getting different sponsors. And as people leave Congress, and at one time we had Lauren Lagarda as sponsoring senator, but then COVID happened right after it was passed, so it was not brought to the president's desk for signature. So I mean to Senate, and because our politics mirror American, so Congress, Senate, and then president. So we didn't get it to go through the Senate, but this year it passed Congress. So now the question is, all right, now we have to go through the Senate, but now being in an election year, all the focus is on elections. So we're saying, oh no, are we going to have to wait for the next session of Congress and do this over again? Because everyone switches, much more, than here in the US. So, but yeah, so that's kind of the goal, is to have protections for writing systems. And the one of the things though is that I guess the areas of debate is what is that value again? Because if we get it as a national script to protect it, that means the government has to put money into it. But I haven't seen any end-to-end studies of all right, if we enable this, what is the socioeconomic benefit? And that's where you'd have to get a cultural anthropologist and economist that can put those things together. And is there a detrimental cost? So I think that's where the work has to be done. But I think eventually we'll get there with the right leadership within the politics. Because if not, the community is already kind of managing it on our own over the past few years. I think that there's potential, but again, it could be just like Arnis. Arnis in 1989, I believe, was named the national sport. And you would think, oh, okay, so that means that every single high schooler or elementary to high school, then you don't want to mess with them. They know Eskrima Arnis, but that never happened. It was just we'll name it the national sport. We'll take some pictures. We'll have some demonstrations, but that's it. Then we have our manongs that are the teachers, passing away, being poor, and not being recognized in the sport. Meanwhile, we have more Filipinos that know Taekwondo and Kung Fu in the Philippines than Arnis, Eskrima, Kali.
We touched about this earlier, but I want to talk to you more about it. Cultural appropriation. What's your take on this?
Yes, it's a complicated gray area. I think the discourse where people kind of mainly talk about it, it's very high level, it's very black and white, but we know that there are many gray areas. And I think that and a lot of it is coming from a privileged American perspective. And for me, as a cultural practitioner, is that if you're going through like any sort of discovery, then you are going to go through cultural appropriation yourself. Because for example, I'm looking for Filipino stuff, right? And it'd be okay, well, let me look at this thing from this group in the Visayas, but then you're Ilocano, or you're Tagalog. So then, but then you're curious, you're looking at things. And then as you get older, get more knowledge. Oh, okay. Well, then let me look at things that are more related to my family, to my group. Like, let me go to, look at Bicolano stuff, rather than, Visayan. So I think it is a growth of a natural growth where you have to go through it and acknowledge it. But people will say, oh, you're a cultural appropriator. I said, yeah, but this girl is only 12 years old. She's just exploring her identity. Give her, you can't go from like not knowing anything to becoming an expert right away. So there's those gray areas where, yes, you're going to explore. Maybe you'll make some mistakes. And, I think that's the difference, the difference between someone exploring their identity versus like a white person opening up a lumpia shop in Beverly Hills, calling it, lumpia dudes, right? And not mentioning, Filipinos. That's different, right? Than somebody that's exploring their own culture.
Yeah, I see that. So let's say you go to a party and then there's a white dude wearing a barong. Do you think that's cultural appropriation?
It depends on the context, because one, he could be Filipino. I've seen lots of Filipinos that look like white guys. Like, oh shit, you're speaking Tagalog? They'll say, oh yeah, I'm from Olongapo. It's like, okay, sorry. So that's number one. I've learned that. Number two, what is that? What is their context? I think that, I would like to know, what is their role, I guess, within, maybe they're adopted or married into a family. Maybe they lived there for 10 years and things like that, or maybe they just think it's cool. And, and I would be okay with that, depending on the person, if they're, douchebag or whatever, but it depends. I'm just not going to see them and then say, oh, the cultural appropriator right away.
Yeah, I love that.
I've done that before, but then, and on the other side, they may think that, all right, I mean, am I cultural appropriating because I'm wearing, whatever? So
yeah, and you could also, people would say also that, like the pure Filipino, like, oh, he's not pure Filipino because he grew up in the States.
Yes, exactly. So, that happens a lot. Like, oh, you're just playing costume because you have you're wearing an ethnic scarf or something like that. So, that's also then traumatic too for a lot of people in the diaspora. And so I have some, some sympathy and compassion for those. And I've learned as I gotten older to not react right away, to maybe observe and maybe ask questions.
Yeah, I completely agree. I know you're connected with some people that does the Batok.
Yes.
How did they learn it?
Yeah, so I worked with Lane Wilkin. Lane Wilkin is a Phil-Am based in Las Vegas. And so one of the things I've learned from Lane is his story. One, if you think of his name, you think, oh, that's a white guy. He's cultural appropriating, but this guy is, way more Filipino than Filipinos. I mean, he speaks fluent Ilocano and, has done tons of research and has, written books about it. And so I learned through him and, his story and what I like about his story is people will say like, oh, if you don't learn from Wang Od, then everything else is fake. You're appropriating. But there are more paths to learn things. So basically traditional tattooing is almost gone from the Philippines. If we take a zoom out from the Philippines, the other cultures that are still practicing it are the Indonesians and the Polynesians, who are our cousins. And so Lane learned actually through a Hawaiian, the traditional, not the patterns, but the actual hand tapping, the tools, because we have the same tools as they have, but ours have been lost. But we have some books that have, documentation and things like that. So basically it was like in the old days where, we meet another culture, we work together, we figure things out, we influence each other through a natural experience, right? Not transactional through money or, like from a Western context. So it was because of his name's the Suluwape family in Samoa. So the Suluwape family in Samoa, they are like known throughout the world as the ones that brought hand tapping, to the mainstream. And it was the dream of Suluwape, Peter Suluwape, that the hand tapping get revitalized throughout the Pacifics, including Philippines, including Taiwan, Indonesia. And that is a 30-year dream. And then, going out to Hawaii and then us working there. And so that's kind of like the context and my legacy where I learned, through Lane, through the Hawaiians, through the Samoans. And so now we kind of get back that culture by connecting the dots and trying to figure things out, because there's not that much documentation that we have in the Philippines.
Yeah, we didn't have papers.
Yeah.
We didn't keep it. I also read that you coined the term pre-Philippines. And I heard one of your, I think you were a guest or something, and you don't say Filipino, you say Tagalog.
Yeah. So around the term pre-Philippine, pre-Filipino, when I used to do talks in public, I would say, this is a pre-Hispanic, pre-colonial, and then, they wouldn't really acknowledge or get into the conversation. And for me, a gauge of a good conversation or a good talk is when people ask questions out of, curiosity or wanting to know more. And then so I changed it and I said pre-Philippine, pre-Filipino. And then people go, huh? What's that? What if we're always Filipino? It was always the Philippines. Or they'll say, well, if we weren't the Philippines, then what were we? They try to do a gotcha. Like, oh, it's Mr. Know-it-all, or ikaw na, what were we then? And then I say, I don't know. Let's talk about it. And to me, that is where the value comes in. It's like, who were we before April 14, 15, 21, right? Before that flag or that cross was put down. And to me, that's the richness and the value of those conversations. So that term pre-Philippine, pre-Filipino, which a lot of people now use, which is great, because then it just raises eyebrows and expands that conversation.
Yeah. By the way, I need to credit you, because now I try to catch myself saying not Filipino, I actually say Tagalog.
Yeah, and that too is because to me, I like to, because when I think that's sort of like the original sin of like the Filipino-ness or the Manila centricness, where a lot of people are bitter. And so I like to acknowledge, like, okay, yeah, Tagalog, or you're Bicolano, Ilocano, because now it just opens up the conversation more. And it makes people like ask, like, oh, my dad was from, Sorsogon or from Bohol, and they did this and spoke that. And it just really opens up it more, rather than just say, oh, Filipino. So, okay, lumpia, Jollibee, Manny Pacquiao adobo.
For sure. I want to ask you on your opinion on this. Is this from colonial mentality, how we are so divided? Like, how the Tagalog hated the Ilocanos hate the Visayans. Is that based from colonial mentality?
I think that it was helped foster that. And I think now everyone hates Tagalogs.
I don't blame them.
Yeah, and rightfully so. And it's not just because of the this more superficial like mannerisms or whatever. It's real, because Manila is the socioeconomic centralism of the Philippines, right? You have to go to Manila, then Manila gets crowded, there's crime or whatever, and then people associate that with Tagalog and Filipino. But if we, decentralize and have, like things in, say, the North for the Ilocanos, like, a Manila for, for the north, the south, central, and we have Cebu and things like that. I mean, there are more Visayan speakers than there are of Tagalog. So why aren't the Visayans represented more in the culture and the politics and the discourse?
Yeah, I read about this. I forgot who wrote it. Some Philippine history that it was the Americans who decided, like, oh, by the way, Tagalog is gonna be the language now. Everybody can go fuck themselves.
Yes, exactly. So then I think that then just created more issues. But now we just say that, okay, well, we don't know why that happened, and it just becomes something that's ingrained in the culture negatively.
Mm-hmm. What's your opinion on the proposal to change the name of the Philippines to Maharlika?
So when the internet first came out, I created a website and I registered the domain nophilippines.com. And it was a petition to change and this was before I even did a lot of the script cultural work. I just thought about it from, because I was reading about, these other countries in Africa that ditched their colonial name. And I thought, you know what, the Philippines should do that. And I remember I got so much hatred for it and,
oh my God,
on the website. But changing it to Maharlika, I don't know about the term Maharlika. I think that people, they get stuck on, like I always tell, like, we should change the name of the Philippines. And then they'll say, oh, then what name should we do it? Huh? What name? I say, I don't know. Let's decide that we need to change the name first. If we agree we need to change the name first, then we can go to the second step. But people already go to the second step, like Maharlika, what's that? Luzon, Luz Viminda, and then Bayan, and all these other things, which is fine. But I'm thinking that if we can get a national consciousness to change the name first, then we'll figure out a creative way on what the name is. But specifically Maharlika, I mean, I don't know. It sounds cool, and you see a lot of like Maharlika, everything. But I've read a lot about the term. People argue that it's an Indian term. There's some studies that say that Maharlika is from the term mahalingam, and lingam meaning phallus, like big penis. So I mean,
I didn't know that.
I don't know if we want that as our name, the big penis people.
Why not?
Or those guys are dicks,
yeah.
But then there's also the other side, like where it's the name Maharlika is tied to Marcos.
I was just gonna say that. Because I believe it was him who first suggested the idea.
Yeah, and that's based on his guerrilla unit where he, supposedly fought the Japanese, but then
killed
we found
everyone.
out that was made up. So
I was gonna ask you this, but for the side, I might edit this out.
Yeah.
Since your family left the Philippines because of the martial law, now Bong Bong is a possibility to win.
Yeah.
What's your opinion on that?
I think that people have short-term memory. And I think that people that are pro Marcos are looking at it very superficially. Like, oh, I remember Marcos in 1980, he gave my family rice. Or they'll say, oh, back then, the exchange rate to US dollars was only 10 to whatever. It's very superficial. And I think that is, because it is a lack of like, historical documentation, and also because the people that want that glory days are the people that look at things like at a very black and white monetary manner, like, oh, okay, if he's president, then I'll have more money, right? Because people want quick fixes to their problems, and we know that the degradation of the Philippines didn't happen overnight. There's a long path, and it's going to take just as long to fix it.
Exactly. It's funny because I was talking to some family members about it that they actually went through martial law, and they're like, "Oh, I'm going to vote for Bong Bong." I'm like, "What is wrong with you? Why would you bring them back? I'm like, no, it was safe back then. Yeah, there were martial law. What are you talking about? Like,
Yeah.
people were vanishing in the middle of the night.
Yeah. Yeah. And it becomes very, it turns back to them, right? Rather than the country as a whole, so
Exactly.
that's one thing that I noticed. It's always like, yeah, I don't want to, I guess I'll say, I don't want to say critical thinking, because critical thinking is such a privilege too. And so, it's difficult, and it's difficult to argue and debate with people that look at things in a very binary, black and white way.
I agree. Lupa, documentary. Let's talk about that.
Yes. I've always talked to my family about some land that we owned in the Philippines. And I think most diaspora people can relate to it. And most, a lot of us, as we get older, we're going to have to deal with these things. And also the film is about like our connection with land in the Philippines and all the drama that accompanies it. So this is a short film, 20 minutes about that, capturing the stories.
It just spoke to me because like my family's bought land, but it's not really on their name. It's on the person that passed away a long time ago.
Yes. Yeah. So then it's like, all right, how do you now? You have to get the affidavit. How do you get the title? You have to go to some province, and it's a hassle. And doing all of that while you're in the U.S.
Exactly. And a good example, one of my family members, she bought a land and she cannot transfer the land because she has to come back home.
Yeah.
And you know how Philippines are with the red tape. It takes 100 years.
Yeah. So it's not like you can go there for 2 weeks and still go to Boracay. You have to go there for like at least 6 months to do it.
Probably a year.
And a lot of, or a year, and a lot of people don't have that privilege to do that.
No, for sure. Let's close out with this topic. NFT. Educate me with this.
Yeah, so NFT stands for non-fungible token, and basically what it is, it's a contract on the blockchain. So NFTs are 3 components. There's the actual asset. The asset could be artwork. It can be a digital file. It could be music. Then there's blockchain technology, which is kind of like if you think Napster in the 90s, where the files are distributed in different computers around the world. And then the third component is cryptocurrency, like Bitcoin, Ethereum, things like that. So all of those are components that make up an NFT. There's a lot of controversy around NFTs now. And I think that, because a lot of people are reading into the headlines of it. And I think that, I'm old enough to remember when the internet first came out. One of my first jobs, actually, when I lived in the Philippines, I was a project manager for a web development company. And my job was to go out and talk to businesses and educate them about the internet. Sounds silly now, right? But I remember going to the Makati Business Club in front of all these CEOs of all these companies and telling them that if they don't have a website in a few years, their business won't exist. And they laughed at me. Who's this kid?
Go
telling
back
me
to America.
Yeah, who's this kid, Amboy, he doesn't know what he's talking about. And they laughed, they giggled. And now we know that the internet is very powerful and much needed in a lot of ways. And it also has a lot of negative aspects too. Like when the internet first came out, there were so much scams. People were saying, "Oh, that's just a fad." The Amazon, what's that? I just want to go to a store and buy books. Netflix came out, and then like, oh, who's gonna watch it streaming? No one's gonna do that. It's too expensive. And then PayPal, people were scared to use PayPal. They're gonna get scammed. Venmo. It happens with any new technology. Then when Twitter came out, people were saying, "Oh, that's a waste of time. Who cares what you eat or you post on Facebook? Who cares about that stuff?" Right?
Yeah.
And then now we're hearing the exact same thing. They're saying, "Oh, NFT is a scam. Who's going to do that? Who cares about digital? I need the physical piece. Why do I need digital Air Jordans?" So it's the same exact argument as the previous generations. Then there are arguments about the environmental impact, which, any new technology isn't going to be optimized for its energy use. There are some, it could be very technical, I can get, but I think people need to think about it within context. Like, for example, YouTube, every year uses as more energy than NFTs. So does Netflix. But are people going to say, oh, you shouldn't use YouTube or Netflix? So it's basically the technology, right? And early, I remember e-commerce days, stuff didn't work. A shopping cart when I was, all that stuff didn't work. Remember, social media didn't work really good. So it's still early. It's just now that we have social media for everyone to be loud about it. But the technology, I think, will change lives. It is being overestimated, I think, in the near term, but underestimated in the long term. And specifically for the Philippines, it's already, the Philippines is the number one owners of NFTs in the world.
Really?
Yes. So if you look at that, so there's a lot of projects. I'm really involved with the NFT community in the Philippines. And as you know, the government wants to regulate and tax and all of that stuff. So we're working through those things. And those were the things that I worked on when I worked in the e-commerce, back in the day. So it's the exact same thing.
What makes it valuable, a certain NFT?
So what's interesting with NFTs is that it's similar to artwork and stocks. So one could be the perception, right? If a famous artist makes an NFT, obviously that's going to make it valuable. Or it could be the rarity, like there's only one of these, right? It's a combination of if you're like sneaker culture or basketball cards, things like that. So it's a combination of all those things that happen then through the during the COVID times where everyone was either bored or they wanted to look for a new hobby or a new side hustle. And that's whether stocks, buying LeBron James rookie cards or whatever. And then now NFTs is a combination of all those things put together.
I love the jeepney that you made.
Oh yes, and that was a collaboration with an artist in the Philippines, and and there's there's a lot of good artists in the Philippines, awesome artists, and this is giving them opportunity to finally make money from their artwork. Because I would want to buy artwork from the Philippines, but can they ship it out? Right? It's hard to ship stuff, and it's expensive. It takes a long time, might get lost. So now with digital art, I mean, it just opens so many doors.
Awesome. Listen, man, you've been amazing. I really do appreciate you coming on the podcast.
Yeah, thank you also. And then, if anyone wants to reach out and talk, follow me on social media.
Of course. Have a good evening, sir.
All right. Thanks, Aaron. Bye.
Thank you. Bye. Again, Kristian, thank you for coming on the podcast. I really do appreciate it. Thank you, listeners, for listening. This is Aaron Del Yosa for An Immigrant's Life. I'll see you guys later.